What makes you bullied and isolated and beat down now is going to make you successful later in life.
It's like all the kids who were labeled nerds growing up, they've all gone on to become billionaires.
Right. I think when it has come to autism, there has been a refusal to allow certain questions because people were afraid of the answers.
What would you say is the one thing that most people get wrong about autism?
For me, this is sort of just a story of what parents can do.
So you weren't raised with a sense of limitation.
Right. The basic premise, right, of Born Lucky is pushing kids to be more rather than just meeting everybody where they're at. How can parents show up and push their kids to be more? So many parents want to take all the adversity away from their kids, right? And this is hold your kid's hand through the adversity and push them just to be more.
How did your dad help you see through the struggles that you were having at the time with Bullies?
So,
Leland Vittert, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I've never been more intimidated by a guy in a hoodie, but I am now.
Well, we keep things real here on The Genius
it.
Life. Yeah, we don't. I mean, I also come from a TV background, but my TV background was a bit different. Do you remember Current TV?
Yes.
Yeah, it was Al Gore's project.
Yeah.
And so even though I was on this news and information network, I got to show up every day in T-shirts and with bedhead. And
How'd that work out?
it didn't work out. It did not work out. So here we are on The Genius Life. But I'm super excited, man, because we have a bunch of mutual friends, Jillian Michaels among them, who is the GOAT, a legend in the fitness space. And she was like, you've got to get my friend Leland on the show. He's got this incredible book coming out. And your book is out, and it became an instant New York Times bestseller. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, it's been wonderful to get the New York Times bestseller. It's been even better to hear from so many families of kids, not just autistic, but ADHD, anxiety. One kid who's had a nut allergy, his mom wrote me and was just like, you've changed how we look at things because number one, we have hope, but number two, we know now we're not alone in this struggle. And I think so many families struggle with whatever issue their kid's going with and dealing with, they struggle alone. And Born Lucky's proof that there's hope and they're not alone.
Well, I think you've become a powerful role model for so many people. And yeah, let's just dive right in. What would you say is the one thing that most people get wrong about autism?
I don't believe that this really is an autism book. It's a parenting book. It's a love story between a father and a son. The best line I've heard about autism, and remember, until I was 25, my parents didn't tell me I had autism, right? That was sort of a whole part of this is from when I was diagnosed, they didn't tell anybody. They didn't tell teachers. They didn't tell therapists. They didn't tell principals, nobody. They didn't tell my sister. They didn't tell me. So I think what the best line I've heard about autism is from, I think it's either Autism Society or Autism Speaks. They say, if you know a kid with autism, you know one kid with autism. There's probably not a lot of, things I can add to that part of the conversation of what do people get wrong? For me, this is sort of just a story of what parents who really lean in can do.
So you weren't raised with a sense of limitation.
Right. And that was the whole idea of my dad, right? He said, I'm going to adapt you to the world, not the world to you. And if we tell you what your diagnosis is, then to your point, limits. Secondly, excuses, right? That it becomes a crutch that you can say, oh, well, I don't have to act that well. I don't have to look people in the eye because, well, I'm autistic. It explains everything. And that was sort of his thought.
How old were you when you were diagnosed?
It started when I was about 6 years old. So my parents were told they needed to have me evaluated, right? Worst thing any parent can hear. So they take me to one of those medical buildings, linoleum floors, old magazines, stale coffee, whatever. They wait for a couple of hours. The woman brings me back and she's like, oh boy, he's got a lot of problems. So terrible behavioral problems. So I couldn't do play dates or birthday parties or anything like that. If a kid even touched me, I'd turn around and slug him. Then there was terrible sensory issues. So if I had socks on that I didn't like or something like that, I would just melt down a jacket, whatever. And then there was big learning disability. So an IQ test is two halves, right? And they average the score together. A 20-point difference between the two scores is a learning disability. I had a 70-point spread. So from mentally retarded on one side to genius on the other. And the woman says to my parents, it's really hard to understand what's going on inside his head. And my dad goes, what do we do? And she said, there's not much you can do. And my dad goes, anything you can do. And this is a guy who had been a very successful entrepreneur, had been used to bending the world to his will. And she goes, generally not. So Born Lucky is to give parents the hope that my parents didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you were raised in a pretty unconventional way. Like, I don't know that most parents that would be parents that would otherwise be in your parents' shoes would have made the same decisions, made the same choices.
Yeah, and I think the message isn't so much like, as I've said a lot, this isn't a prescription, right? This isn't like how to turn your autistic kid into a news anchor. It is how can parents show up and push their kids to be more. It's the lesson of what really engaging can be. And it's also sort of a poignant story that so many parents want to take all the adversity away from their kids, right? And this is hold your kid's hand through the adversity and push them just to be more, right? Just say like, okay, and it started with my dad telling me like, you're going to do I was 5 or 6 years old, you're going to do 200 push-ups a day. Like these little ways to earn self-esteem, even as a kid who obviously had so many other issues.
How did he help? How did your dad help you see through the struggles that you were having at the time with Bullies?
So 200 push-ups a day, 5 days a week, right? 2, he became sort of the person I came home to every day, right? But it was awful for him. It was awful for me. 5th grade, I write in Born Lucky about how he's hoping in 5th grade things are better. I've now been to 2 or 3 different schools, right? And he comes over to this new school that I'm at. And he goes up to the PE fields where there was PE class, whatever, in the afternoon. And he looks at the PE teacher who he knew from a different school and said, how's Lucky doing? And my dad had been a great athlete. Athletics had been a big part of his life. And the guy goes, well, I think he's better. He's doing better this month. My dad goes, oh, that's great. Let's go see him. Where is he? Out in the fields. And the guy goes, I don't think that's a good idea. My dad goes, why not? And he said, well, I had to put him with the girls. So for a couple months, I was with the girls in PE, and actually ended up having to leave that school in the middle of the year. So it was very rough. But the thing my dad kept always saying to me is one, I'm going to find things that you can have self-esteem about, right? Push-ups, rowing, physical fitness, flying, all these different things, number one. And then number 2, his line always was, what makes you bullied and isolated and beat down now is going to make you successful later in life. So,
ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
It's like all the kids who were labeled nerds growing up, they've all gone on to become billionaires.
Right.
It's like that's the.
Yeah, I always say like I never liked anyone who liked high school.
I like that.
You kind of got to think about that because the values in high school are so screwed up that doesn't necessarily make for a good life.
It's so true. So, I mean, for parents listening that have children with neurodevelopmental challenges, I mean, what would you say is the message to send to them? Not everybody has the fortitude, the wherewithal that your dad had, but how can we encourage them to perhaps see things a little bit differently?
Well, I think, right, the hope that is parents can make an enormous difference. And I think it doesn't really matter what your kid's dealing with. And I just to say, these are the 2 stories I've learned since we wrote Born Lucky. One, a father of a profoundly autistic kid, nonverbal, 22, living in a group home. His dad kept seeing reports that when he would go to the pool on pool rec center play days, the kid loved to splash in the pool. The dad goes, okay, we're going to teach him how to swim. They said, you can't teach a 20-year-old autistic kid how to swim. He said, nope, we're going to teach him how to swim. And now the kid swims 1.5 miles every day. He's so much happier. He's all of a sudden getting up in the morning, no behavioral issues. He's putting on his swim gear because he loves to swim, totally changed his kid's life. All because of a father said to the experts, my kid can be more, right? And then there was the mom with a nut allergy, and she came up to me a couple of weeks ago, right when Born Lucky came out, and she goes, your book spoke to me. And I'm like, I know your kids. Both of your kids are varsity athletes at Ivy League schools. They're both model good looking, had great high school experiences. I knew them in high school. Great kids, but how does this relate? And she goes, when my son was 3, he had a nut allergy. And I was told I had to pull peanuts out of every classroom, every play date, every birthday party, just put them in the no peanut bubble, right? And she said, my kid won't have a normal life if that happens. So she went doctor to doctor, 4 or 5 doctors, finally found someone to desensitize him to peanuts. He would have never been a varsity athlete in an Ivy League school. He would have never been allowed in ROTC, which is he's doing now, had his mom not said, like, I'm not going to make everything easy on him. I'm going to push him to be more.
Yeah, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. It's
well, and if you want to be defined by your limitations, that's really easy, right? It's so easy to say, oh well, I have this diagnosis, I can't do this. Okay, so that I think is the real lesson here.
Do you think parents should push their kids more rather than just protecting them?
Mine certainly did. I'm not really in the advice business. I'm not a parent. I'm a kid. So like Born Lucky, right, is a parenting book written by a kid. So what I can say is that, my dad's afterword, he wrote the last couple pages.
I loved it, by the way, the afterword. Yeah, I want to read, actually, there's some bullet points that he leaves your readers with.
Yeah, and that, I think it does. I think you do need to push your kid to be more. And I think so often it's uncomfortable, right? And it's hard for parents because there's already so much going on. And the one thing you don't as a parent ever want to see is your kid struggling, right? And if you can pull that struggle away, you do. And that's not what's going to help them later in life.
Yeah. There's we talk a lot on the podcast about the concept of hormesis. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'm not.
Yeah, so hormesis is basically like beneficial stress. So like a low dose of a toxin or a stressor that, in high doses might otherwise harm you, actually leads to an adaptive effect. So exercise is the perfect example of that everybody will recognize. You stress yourself out in the gym, you push yourself past comfortable limits, and it compels your body to adapt and to ultimately grow stronger.
Right.
Same concept behind sitting in a sauna or eating certain chemicals that are naturally found in plant foods, for example. They strengthen your microbiome. But in a way, they're toxic, but that toxin actually elicits a rejuvenating, like a protective response.
Yeah, no, I didn't know the name for it, but that is 1,000% true of what my dad put me through on a daily basis, right?
Yeah. What are some of because you talk about in the book how your dad taught you certain social skills.
Right. Well, he realized that the social and emotional fabric and concept that comes so naturally to most people, it's not that I didn't understand it. I sort of had objectively all the wrong instincts. Socially and emotionally. Like when people were laughing, I tried to be serious. If people were serious, I tried to tell a joke. It didn't work. So he would take me out with his friends because I had no friends. I had no kids that I was ever around. And he would sit at lunch with me and his friends. And when I would start mouthing, not really mouthing off. I was never disrespectful, but start interrupting, start interjecting, start badgering people with questions on and on. Like I'd be badgering you about how do you pick your supplements and what do your workouts look like and how do you sell the ads on the podcast? No. And my dad would tap his watch, right? And that was my signal to, number one, be quiet, but number two, to bookmark it. So then we'd go back later as we were driving home, and we'd say, okay, so when Max was talking about why he had to get up at 3:00 in the morning today, and you interrupted and asked him about how he picks what supplements he's going to buy or promote, why did you think that's what he wanted to talk about? And then he'd be like, okay, well, what do you think he would want to talk about? And then we would role play that conversation. Yeah, like, now do you see how you ask a follow-up question? How you do this? How you do that? And that, that training was sort of teaching me the very basics of social interaction.
It sounds, it sounds like a post-mortem of sorts.
It's like game film. Same kind of thing, for an athlete.
Do you think that these social skills, knowing that social skills can be taught as they were for you, do you think that we should be teaching them in schools?
It's a great question. I think the basic premise, right, of Born Lucky is pushing kids to be more rather than just meeting everybody where they're at. Because, my dad, as he said, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that if I did nothing, what was going to end up, which is that you weren't going to be able to interact in normal life. And I think, was it really hard that when I was in 7th grade, my parents get called in? I've now been in 4 different schools. They get called in first 2 weeks at this new school. They get sat down. The principal looks at them and says, everybody at this school thinks Lucky is really weird. So imagine being a parent sitting across, the table at a principal's office hearing that. And then she follows up, and I do too, right? So it'd been very easy for them to say, well, he is weird. He's got all these diagnoses. He's got all these problems. And now you, Miss Principal, need to fix all of these problems for him. And the principal goes, fine. We'll just let him be him and we're not going to push him and on and on and on. It would have been really easy, but it would not have helped me grow, to your point about the stressors and everything else.
Do you think being labeled weird as a kid was, in a way, your superpower?
I've heard the whole superpower thing. I know that's a very in vogue term in the autism community. Look, if my wife, I got married 3 or 4 months ago, I should probably have better ideas in 3 or 4 months if she hears this. And we were married 94 days ago. No, she's fantastic. But if my wife was pregnant right now and you gave me a box to check and I could check my child will be autistic or not, I'm checking no 1,000 times out of 1,000, right? So I don't know if something's a superpower. I think that when you learn to do something, right, and when it's hard to do it, you force yourself to become better at it, right? Like the guy who's really fat who all of a sudden loses weight and becomes this sort of crazy fitness person probably is more disciplined at it than the person for whom it's always been really easy and was always, just sort of worked out a little bit, but was always skinny and good looking.
Yeah, but also if you were to ask that person if he could, if he had a genie in a bottle and could have never have been fat to begin with, to have allowed himself to get to that point to begin with, he probably would say, I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing. Maybe he'd say no.
Well, somebody who was really fat at one point and it was a pretty pudgy kid, if I could look like you and not have to work at it, I would take that. I'd be fine. I'd be good.
It's a lot of work and a lot of knowledge. But
you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's people who naturally are athletic and there are people who naturally things come easy to. And then there's things that it's really hard for. So
yeah. I think for me, it's mainly the knowledge acquisition and the discipline, but it's not that I was an athlete or anything like that.
But the discipline part, discipline's learned, right? Doing things and forcing yourself in that discipline is really important. And look, somebody, there's times that I revert right back to being that 8-year-old that needed my dad to tap his watch. A couple of months ago, I was with my wife's family up in Idaho, and we were playing golf. So we finished a round of golf with this older couple or twosome that had joined my father-in-law and I. And we get done playing golf. I'm running late. We're in the sort of parking lot cart area, and I'm trying to pack my golf bag and just I'm late. And one kind of very characteristic trait of autism is becoming super hyper task focused. You just zero in on something and nothing can sort of break through the wall. So the guy who we played golf with comes over and is standing over me to say Leland, and I'm down there packing the golf bag and just totally zoned out. Leland, and I even in the moment knew okay, stop doing what you're doing, let the golf bag sit, look him in the eye, be polite, do all the things that your dad taught you. I'm 42 years old, and I couldn't break out of it. And finally, after 2 minutes of standing over me, the guy just left. I was so rude to him. And I was Jesus Christ, you're back being 8 years old. All that discipline that you talked about, totally gone. And I texted him later and said, I'm so sorry. Can't believe I was that rude to you. I really apologize, on and on and on. I didn't then say, oh, by the way, I'm autistic, right? One thing my dad says, you can never use this as an excuse.
Wow, I love that. But that is in a way a superpower. I would imagine that level of focus is what it takes to become a master at anything. I mean, I'm thinking about putting in your 10,000 hours to becoming a musician or a chef or whatever it is that you aspire to do. It does, require that level of focus. And now, at 40, I'm 43, and I have friends that are, super successful, well-known musicians and the like. And there is something kind of off about the way that they approach their practice, for example, or their craft.
Yeah, well, look, and people would probably say there's something off about how you approach workouts, right? If you want to be if you want to be really good at something, you have to approach it with that discipline. For me, just to get to baseline, I had to approach it with that kind of crazy discipline. Like I'm not, I'm not the how to win friends and influence people guy, right? Like that's not me. But I am probably baseline, like I'm acceptable. Whereas before, if I had not spent those 10,000 hours, I'd be well below.
What do you make of the conversation being had today, because autism has kind of permeated the zeitgeist in such a big way with regards to the current administration and all the talk about, everything from Tylenol to the vaccine conversation. You've got people now that, on the other side of the aisle that vehemently oppose anything that any talking point of the current administration, who, the notion that there might be something effective to potentially treat or prevent autism is now seen as like, oh my God, they're trying to change us. Like, what do you make of all that?
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, and I have the chemistry grades to prove both of those things to anyone who asks. So, the one thing I can say is, thank God we are now having this conversation. You think about when I was diagnosed, it was 1 in 1,500. Now it's 1 in 31 kids diagnosed with autism, 3 times higher with boys, higher still in poor and minority communities. This should be the scientific question of our time. And Chris Hayes, MSNBC anchor, sort of was like scoffing at RFK Jr. He was like, RFK Jr. is obsessed with finding the cause of autism. Well, why wouldn't we be obsessed with finding the cause of autism? Why, if there is a way to prevent kids from going through what I went through, and many children in families who have far rougher, more difficult situations, if there's a way to prevent that, why wouldn't we? And the smartest people that I know don't know what's causing this, right? I mean, we had Ajay Bhattacharya on my show, and he said, I don't think it's vaccines, but I don't know, and I can't tell you conclusively. So to me, there's this group of people that would much rather score political points rather than help our kids. And that part, I think, is really, I'm not going to use an adjective for it, but I think it's very telling. There are people who seem to care more about the politics than trying to answer this question. And as somebody who grew up with this and hopes that my child wouldn't have to grow up with it, that's really hard to deal with.
Well, do you think, I completely agree with you. Do you think that trying to find answers and laying these questions bare for the sake of scientific inquiry, do you think that these questions are at odds with the notion that, well, like, even if you're on the spectrum, like, you should still, of course, love yourself and like, but I feel like the conversation has been taken as a way to... Yeah,
it's weird, right? Like there was a time when cochlear implants, remember how like if someone who was deaf, they came up with the idea of putting an implant that you could then allow someone who was deaf to hear. And there was this big split in the deaf community over maybe you shouldn't get a cochlear implant because somehow you weren't owning your deafness. I'm like, I don't know, if I didn't have a leg all of a sudden, I would have an artificial limb. Like, please. So I don't understand the autism community of somehow saying that if we search for these answers and we are honest about what the causes might be and everything else, that somehow it's diminishing the people who are affected by this. You can both say we're going to do everything we can to help the people who are affected by this, which I think is fantastic, and the funding and the focus on it is really good. And we can try to make sure that people in the future, children in the future, are not affected by it. If you explain it with any other condition, right? You don't say, well, let's not find a way to cure diabetes because it somehow is insulting to the people who have diabetes. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how the rise and ubiquity of the GLP-1 drugs has kind of silenced the health at any size movement. It's interesting to see what that's done to the fat acceptance movement now that those drugs are available to pretty much everybody.
Also what also happened to the fat acceptance movement was reality, right? Like the facts are the facts that being overweight is really dangerous to your health. And I think kind of we went through this time in America where like up was down and down was up. And you had to sort of say that to be accepted by a certain part of the elite cabal of America. And then there was a revolt against that. And now we acknowledge that being fat is unhealthy. Now, that doesn't mean you should shame somebody, but in the same way, we can now acknowledge that if we can prevent future generations from having autism or double the rates of autism that we have now, that would probably be a good thing.
Amen. Have you looked into at all, because there is this conversation about, the increased rates of autism, many will claim that that's just a function of broader diagnostic criteria.
I've heard that. Again, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied these things. All I can say is my reporting as a journalist shows that doesn't explain everything, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly the fact that when it was 1 in 1,500 or 1 in 2,000, you had to be sort of what we would now call profoundly autistic in order to be diagnosed. Now we know that it's a much different, different criteria, but that doesn't seem to explain it. It doesn't also explain why there's various autism rates in different states and among different communities. Because if it was just surveillance, if it was just now this broader criteria, you would think that California and New York would have the same rates, or California and South Carolina or whatever. It also doesn't explain why in poor and minority communities there's much higher rates of autism, because you would think that in wealthier communities that they would be the ones with more surveillance, so in diagnostic access. So that isn't explained either. There seems to be some other thing going on. What that isn't known yet. Yeah,
but I love the fact that we can now have these conversations and ask these questions. Science asks questions; it doesn't silence them.
Well, someone once said to me that science is the pursuit of truth, right? It's not the truth. But I would even go back to what I do, which is journalism. The thing that was said to me in journalism, it was a great line by Tom Brokaw from his last NBC Nightly News program. He said, "It's never the questions that get us in trouble, it's the answers." And I think when it has come to autism, there's been a refusal to allow certain questions because people were afraid of the answers. And that to me, I think has now stopped, or we've sort of moved on from that. And finally we'll hopefully get some real answers.
Yeah, well, it's not like the crazy outlandish lies that rile people up and ultimately are threatening to the status quo and to the establishment and whatnot. It's truth. It's the truth that is ultimately the threat. And that's why I think, for example, there's been all this pushback to Casey Means, who has not yet been confirmed as we record this, for Surgeon General, but she's somebody who was like, she wasn't establishment enough, and so the establishment therefore doesn't.
Look, I live in Washington, LA. They're actually sort of oddly similar towns. We call DC Hollywood for ugly people, but sure, there's nothing DC hates more than a threat to the establishment in DC, and it's why you saw, broadly speaking, it's why you saw such a pushback from both establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats against Trump.
Right.
Especially in 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
Because he was a threat to that.
Exactly. Super interesting. Have you looked into at all, because another compound now making headlines is leucovorin, which is this sort of folic acid.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
It's a form of folate, actually. Yeah. And it was apparently just FDA approved as a treatment for certain types of autism.
I've not looked into it. The big takeaway for me is, as I wrote this book and sort of started talking to people about Born Lucky, how little I know about autism, right? And part of that is because from when I was diagnosed to when I was 25, my dad didn't even tell me, and my parents didn't tell me. So this wasn't like I grew up knowing, hey, I'm autistic, this is what I need to do. It was, this is how you need to adapt to the world, and we're going to help you do that. Okay. So I am far from an expert in this. Now, the ... is, if I had a child, and I know if my parents, could have had access to things that would have helped, by all means. So finally we are having, as you point out, we're honestly having this conversation. I think what's interesting about Born Lucky is how, and the title goes, A Dedicated Father, a Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism. It's sort of the journey that is more about the lessons that come from it, and I think it's why it applies so much more broadly beyond just autism, but to sort of any kid that's having a hard time. It's hope for every parent of a kid who's having a hard time.
Yeah. How'd you earn the childhood nickname Lucky?
Great question. So 1982, my mother is having her first pregnancy. She's 35 years old. Very in vogue at the time to have a natural birth. All this research that doctors are ordering C-sections because it's more convenient, whatever. And my mom gets an ultrasound right before I was born, like at 8 months or whatever, that shows that I am upside down. So the doctor says to my mom, I really have a bad feeling about this. I think you should have a C-section. My mom thinks about it. She wants to have a natural birth. And she says, if I'm not going to take my doctor's advice, I should get a new doctor, not take his advice. So she takes his advice. She schedules a C-section. She goes in. I'm being born. My mom and dad are on one side of like the blue curtain right in the operating room. I guess every parent has been there. I have not. I'm not a parent. But my mom and dad are together. And so I'm writing in Born Lucky, and this is what came from the interviews with my parents. But my mom and dad are there holding hands, and all of a sudden you hear the nurse go, "Oh my God." Not what a parent wants to hear in the delivery room. Then the doctor goes, "This is a lucky baby." And the nurse goes, oh my God, the luckiest baby. This is a lucky baby. And my mom's hand like just clenches down on my dad's, right? Like, what's wrong with our child who's being born? And my dad goes, "Everything okay?" And the doc goes, "Give us a second." And then my dad hears, "This is a lucky baby." And he sticks his head around again. It's like, "Everything okay?" And the doctor goes, "Yeah, everything's fine. Give us a second. Everything's fine." And what it turns out is the umbilical cord was tied around my neck and in 2 knots. So had I been born naturally, I would have been dead.
Wow.
And the doctor who delivered me the next day came up to visit me in my mother's like hospital room, right? And outside the hospital room, there's like a little whiteboard and it says Leland Vittert. And then it says Carol Vittert, like, mom, son, whatever. And then it said like how much I weighed and when I pooped and anything else. And the doctor took a Sharpie and crossed out Leland and wrote, "Call him Lucky." So from up until I was born to when I was 18, I went by Lucky Vittert. And then when I went to college, I didn't want to have to tell the story 1,000 times. So, it says on your wall and on Facebook in your room, Leland. So I just started going by Leland.
Wow. Damn. That's a crazy story. Your parents, man, they seem highly resilient and and just incredible across the board.
I think that's accurate. I think, everybody feels like their parent is a hero, and they should, right? Obviously, some people have different relationships with their parents than others. We're recording this at 2:00. I've already talked to my dad 2 or 3 times today.
Wow.
We always call each other to say goodnight. He still is my best friend.
Shout out to Mark.
Born Lucky is the story of how my dad for a long time was my only friend. So, yeah, remarkable. And I think also you pointed out, and I think this is really wonderful, that you said your parents, so both my mother and my father. And my mom, as my dad wrote in the afterword, and I see you have it open to it, she was the unsung hero that was the glue that kept everybody together and still does.
Yeah, I wanted to read because I love this section of the book. Your dad wrote the afterword, as we mentioned. He wrote down these 4 principles that he wrote down for himself when you were first diagnosed. So maybe we can go through each of them and then have you sort of respond and expound on them. But yeah, so number 1 is have no expectations about the future.
So important. I think this is, every father sees their son as the star quarterback, throwing the pass in the high school football game, and then college, or whatever fathers have dreams of their sons being. And I think my dad realized that he couldn't have any expectations because he didn't know what was going to end up happening with me. That is definitely true about no expectations in the sense of like what I would become. There were really strong expectations, though, in how I would act, right? He said to me early on, you can control 2 things. Doesn't matter. You can control your character. Are you a good person? Do you tell the truth? Are you respectful? Are you all those things? And your work ethic. So you may not be athletic, but you can do 200 push-ups, right? And work ethic and just dogged perseverance is something that, obviously made him successful as an entrepreneur, and that he passed down to me as this is something you can control of your willingness just to work.
Did you know, this is a bit of a tangent, but had you always known that you wanted to go into media?
Oh, no, not really.
No?
it sort of happened by accident, but it was one of the things, and I had my first internship in high school, but it was one of the things that yields really easily to hard work, especially just being a reporter, like a street reporter, because I wasn't going to be good at math. I wasn't going to be good at chemistry and go be a doctor. I wasn't really a good writer, so I wasn't going to go be a lawyer. Like all the sort of typical career paths weren't really options. So being a reporter that just if you outworked people, it set you apart, that really helped me.
Super interesting. And I can relate to that because I had always been interested in science, but my grades were also very mediocre. I was just not into, my scholarship was always very, even to myself, like I was dismayed by how challenging, because I was always very smart, how challenging.
Humble of you, and humble too, right?
No, I mean, but my grades sucked. So there was always like this cognitive dissonance where on the one hand, I had this like potential that my teachers would always tell me and my parents about. But then on the other hand, I really struggled. I struggled to focus. Like I've talked about this on a recent episode of this show where I all throughout school, I never finished a single book because I just couldn't sit and focus long enough on it. And my brain had always functioned like a light switch, like very similar to the kind of blinders that you were describing that people with autism tend to have about things. That's kind of how I am about the things that I'm passionate about, whether it's fitness or health science, music, cinema, but that's pretty much it. And so, the classes in school or in college that, most kids would take to get the easy A's, like I would get D's in simply because I wasn't interested. I just wasn't going and, So very, super relatable. And I ultimately ended up going into media as well. So number 2, according to your dad, is another principle that he wrote down for himself when you were a child. Under no circumstances let your child feel that they have ever disappointed you, ever. And he writes that in all caps, ever, under no circumstance.
Yeah. And, I think there was a lot of times that clearly my behavior was hard for him and hard for him to deal with. The only time I ever disappointed him, and he said this, was the one time that I was untruthful, that I lied. And that was the two things you control, right? Your character and your work ethic. And inborn lucky, I'll let your listeners read it, but it is a moment, and it showed me how important it was. And look, my dad still, he's 77 years old. He still has the piece of paper that he made me write. He made me sit at the dining room table and write 1,000 times, "I will always tell the truth." And he said, "This is all that matters." And it actually came from his dad in a letter that his dad had written him before his dad died. But that was the only time he ever showed that he was disappointed in me.
Well, having that value hardwired into you, I mean, that's what makes you a good journalist.
And it also cost me my job at Fox News, but yes.
Damn. I want to know more about that.
It's in the book too.
It's in the book, okay. Number 3, you are the depository, and he's speaking, obviously,
of himself.
He's your father of himself. You are the depository of their hurt, their frustration, and their humiliations. You must listen and listen, morning before school and late into the night.
And this is what he did, right? I mean, he was my only friend. So, the day that I came home from school in 8th grade where a teacher in front of the entire art class didn't think I was going to be Picasso, the teacher said, "Hey, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards." And I can see even, like, you don't have kids, and you even have a response to that, right? Like, if the teachers are doing that, you can imagine what the kids are doing. And, I mean, I would spend hours at night with him, crying, angry, sort of humiliated, emotionally tortured, just sort of working through all those problems. And he was there. He just took it. I didn't know this until we wrote the book. And he didn't even tell me, but I was interviewing my mom. And she said, what you didn't realize was a lot of nights he would leave your room after you'd cried yourself to sleep or whatever and come downstairs at midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. And I would find him in the living room, all dark in the living room, lights out, crying, just emotionally wrecked. And he would get up the next morning and he would take me to breakfast and we would talk, and then he would send me off to school. And I asked him, look, Dad, if you hadn't been able to quit your job, sell your companies, and really take care of me, what would you have done? And he got very quiet and he said, I would have worked the night shift because I knew that your only chance, in his words, was for me to be there every morning and every night.
Wow. Powerful. So he gave up his career essentially? Wow.
Yeah, he was about 40, 42, so about yours and mine. I mean, I'm 43. I think we're about the same age.
Yeah, same age, yeah.
And he was sort of right. He'd done very well. I think he was at the cusp of sort of an explosion and would have been sort of one of the great entrepreneurs of our time. And everybody thinks their dad could have done everything. The track record was pretty clear with him and what he had been offered to go do at that moment. And he said, my son needs me. And that was it.
Wow. Do you think he had an alternate choice? I mean, do you think that parents, do you think that every parent needs to give up their career in order to help a child with challenges?
No, I mean, absolutely not. And I think that was what my dad said, right? Was like, he said I would have just worked the night shift. So the point was being there and being present, and then the principles that he laid out, and holding your kid's hand through it all, rather than trying to take the adversity away. It's really hard, and I think this is what I didn't quite grasp because I'm not a parent, but it's so hard to watch your kids struggle. And so many parents who've called me, emailed me, texted, whatever, that I never knew, but read Born Lucky, they've said, like, I didn't realize how much I was letting my sort of kid get away with, or that I was doing for them, or I was taking away. I was letting them not do because it was hard for me to watch them have a hard time. And I think that was a big part of this book and a big part of the message of my dad saying, like, I'm going to be here, but you're doing it. You and remind me of the word that you told me. Hormesis. Like, you're going through the hormesis. Like, and I'm going to watch you with it, but you're going to go through it.
I love that. Okay, principle number 4. Tell them that they have the right stuff for life, that the currency of high school, etc., is not the currency of life. There are many more years after the 6 years of junior high and high school.
Yeah. What he didn't tell me was that middle school, junior high, and high school were great training for a Washington newsroom. Because the Viper Pit that is a Washington newsroom is sort of like the Viper Pit of high school and middle school. But that happens to be true. Obviously, a big part of that was also teaching me how to kind of adapt so that as I got older, I could get along in the real world, if you will.
No, but I love that advice because high school can be so challenging. It is so challenging for so many. I mean, I was like, in the latter years of my high school education, I was somewhat popular, but I began high school as not very popular and super introverted and very shy. And I think that's probably a very helpful reminder for so many to offer their children that the currency of high school is not the currency of life.
And so many parents want their kid to be popular, right? And they're like, oh, do this to be popular. Like, it really is true. The currency of real life is very, very different.
If you could offer your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think it would just be to stay the course, right? And there's a moment in Born Lucky, not one of my prouder moments, where I sort of tried to change myself to fit in, and it ended in complete disaster. But I think that lesson that just stay the course, and I think it's why the book has resonated so much, and people who hear the story buy it, and then they write me, and I hope your listeners do too, because it's that universal message of hope for every parent. And you pointed out right. Like, I mean, we look at you right now and go, like, you had a hard time in high school? No one can believe it. But there's so many kids who are struggling and having a hard time, and this is really hope for parents of how it gets better.
Were there any, aside from your wonderful parents, like, had any tools at that point helped you? I mean, knowing that we're the same age, I mean, were you on the internet at that time? Like, did you find solace in maybe an online community of other kids going through similar stuff?
No, I was really, and this was before, I guess, like you would get on AOL on Instant Messenger and be like, hey, I have no friends. Anybody want to be my friend here? I think I read a lot. And the other thing my parents did, this was huge, right, is they gave me things outside of school to take pride in, right? So push-ups from when I was younger, then rowing, and also flying. It wasn't about the activity. It was about giving you something to have self-esteem about. And one of the real takeaway messages from my dad and from the book, self-esteem is earned, not given. And so much of today, it's everybody's wonderful. Everybody gets a participation trophy, and fat is fabulous, and on and on. And that's not how I grew up.
Do you think coddling culture is working to the detriment of our kids?
Somebody said that this was they called Born Lucky the anti-coddling manifesto. That was not my words, but that was somebody remarked that the book was an anti-coddling book, and I think that's very true.
Wow. What was the most challenging part of writing the book?
Reading the audiobook. So it's one thing to write something and to talk about it. It's another thing to go back and read and do the edits, but actually to read the audiobook and read through some of the really most awful, horrible times, right? And I say this a little bit jokingly, but I never went to therapy, right? And now every kid has 3 therapists, especially if they have some problem, right? So Born Lucky, right? This is the worst parts of my life, the worst, rock bottom. And going to therapy on national television, on podcasts and everything else is not really a bucket of fun. But if it helps people, and if it shows kids who are struggling the way I did that there's hope, and shows their parents that there's hope, it's worth it.
It was an instant New York Times bestseller, huge success. Has the success of the book surprised you?
It is what surprised me most about the success, the reception, whatever we call it. One is the vast number of emails and stories, but also world's super divided, right? And this isn't, I live in the political world because I'm a political journalist, but you think about, there's almost nothing that the left and right agrees on. I've been on Steve Bannon's podcast, so as far right as you get. I've been on Morning Joe with Joe Scarborough. Both of them doubled the length of the segments and were almost crying based on the book and how meaningful it was to them. So the last nonpartisan happy thing is parental love, right? And we can all agree on how important it is. And we had this sort of a lot of sort of thought went into what are going to be the criticisms and how are people going to attack it, and what's the reception from the autism community, and on and on and on. People have really almost universally said thank you for just telling the story, and thank you for giving us hope, and thank you for letting parents know they're not alone, because so many parents who have a kid having a hard time are sitting there going, we're alone in this fight, as my dad felt like he was. And I think in the afterword he says, you feel alone, like the world is turned against you. And they're not alone. Yeah.
I think it was RFK Jr. that said, we have to love our children more than we hate our political opponents, more than we hate each other. And I think it's so true, that, politics are just awful, so tedious at times. And I get it. Everybody's got their vision of what's going to lead the country to a better place. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's about showing up for the people that you love and doing the best that you can by them.
Well, my dad certainly did that for me.
I love it. Well, thanks for writing the book. Is there anything you want to leave my listeners with? I think this is a fascinating topic. It's not a topic that we cover very often, but again, I think that you're a really powerful role model for people, and I love that the book is sort of the antithesis to coddling culture. I think that's super important today, and also it's very well written, and it's a fairly
thank you.
Yeah, it's very well written. You've got wonderful stories within it, and and it's not a very long read, so it's something that you can get through in a weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you want to?
No, I'm really just grateful, not only to you, but sort of the reception that this has gotten has meant so much to my dad. And, we really struggled with whether or not to put this story out there. And as I was interviewing him for Born Lucky, right, we would get to a story, right, one of the really sort of deeply personal stories, and he would be like, do we really want to say that? Do you really want that? You're going to tell that? And I was like, Dad, this ain't going to work. So you're going to be as raw with me as you can be. I'm going to write the manuscript, and I'm going to give it to you before I turn it into HarperCollins. And you know what it's like being a book author. Like, you're on deadline. You've got to get this in. So about 3 or 4 days before the deadline, I handed him the manuscript. And he's like, reads it, and he goes, I can't do this. Like, this is way too personal. I can't. And this is just not us, me. We're very private people. And I said, well, okay. And I didn't have a plan. Like, I needed to turn in a manuscript. I didn't have a backup one. And he said, I don't know if we can do this. I said, Dad, I said, let me ask it to you this way. If when I had been diagnosed and that woman said to you, there's no hope, there's nothing you can do, just sort of, he is who he is. If instead she had handed you Born Lucky, not as a prescription, not as a cure, but just as proof of the power that you as a parent have, the hope that exists, what would you have done? He goes, I would have read it every week. I said, well, I think that's kind of your answer, right? And he goes, yeah. And that's when he wrote the afterword. He wrote the afterword in an hour. You said it was the best part of the book.
I loved it.
And that was really, I think that's really the message.
Is he surprised by the book's success?
Well, he's still very uncomfortable. Like I said to him, like, it's one thing to be a New York Times bestselling author. It's another thing to be the subject of a New York Times bestselling book. And he kind of thought about it. He goes, I don't like it. But what I've done is I've sent him all the Amazon reviews and all the emails I've gotten from families. And it means so much to him. He's like, okay, it's worth it. If being public about this can help other people, then it's worth it.
Damn, that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming out. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Yeah, I've got one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people pick up the book? Where can they find you on social media?
Same places they can pick up your books.
Amen.
Wherever books are sold.
Support local bookstores.
There you go. And make sure you go to your local bookstore and ask for it. As you know, like, it's hard sometimes as a first-time author, even if you are successful, to get into local bookstores. But local bookstores, Amazon, wherever you get your books. And then I'm real easy. I'm at Leland Vittert on social media.
Love it. The last question that gets asked everybody on the show: what does living a genius life mean to you?
Listening to my wife.
That's adorable. What's your wife's name?
Rachel. And actually, you'll appreciate this. We're in LA filming this. I brought her out. She loves, like, health and wellness and beauty and everything else. So we get to the hotel yesterday morning. We get in early, and on the menu is a fresh ginger shot. And she's like, well, I'm going to order a fresh ginger shot. I was like, well, can't let you do this alone. I'm going to try one. So this is day 2 of me doing ginger shots. I don't know if my skin's clear. Or...
It's glowing. It's glowing.
There
you got to take her to Erewhon. It's sort of like an institution here in LA for health conscious people.
Okay.
With disposable income. It's very expensive, but no, it's a great place to go to just look at all the latest, like, health trends and stuff like that. Excellent hot food bar.
I would think she's probably already found it.
Probably.
Yeah. I'll get that alert on my credit card.
She's already had the Hailey Bieber smoothie.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
It's a big thing. Well, thanks, Leland. Thanks for coming out. And thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones in your life that may benefit from it. Pick up Born Lucky, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.